Ellen Godbey Carson is a member of Church of the Crossroads. She's a retired attorney, was a president of the Bar Association. She's also a parliamentarian, believe it or not. And so we're not going to be dealing with the finer points of Robert's Rules of Order, but we are going to talk about how you can hold meetings effectively and legally in the state of Hawaii. It's been my privilege to be in one of Ellen's workshops, I think at an Hawai. So we are in for a treat. So without any more conversation from me, Ellen Godbey Carson.
Thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you for this group. I feel like it's a homecoming because as I've looked at the names coming in, there's so many of you I know and just appreciate the leadership that you're providing for your churches and in our community. And I just hope there's one iota of information I can give you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you can avoid some problems at your church with holding some larger online meetings, particularly for your annual meeting and for your congregation meetings. So that's what this is going to be about today. I did just help the Church of the Crossroads with our annual meeting that was held on January 31st, the same date that Central Union did. And you'll see some documents from both of those churches in your packet today that I hope will assist there. What I want to be able to do is just share some information we learned. It's all been a fast learning curve for me because I wasn't really skilled on Zoom except for a couple months ago when I started planning for this. And there's some pitfalls there, but I want to warn you against those so I can help, I hope, highlight areas so that you can avoid some problem areas there. So since Zoom is the best known platform and free of charge to everybody, that's the particular platform I'll be talking about today, but there are certainly other options available and you may have those. I just don't know enough about them to advise you about them today. I have two sets of documents, as Jack has just mentioned, that were there when you checked in. So please do feel free to download them. One is the slides I'll be going over, so you don't need to copy any of that information. The other is a whole series of templates, and you'll see them referred to at the bottom of my slides as to what page number is relevant to what's being discussed on that slide. So you can go exactly to that area and see if there's information there that would be helpful to you. And as we call it here in Hawaii, to be able to cockroach somebody else that's created an idea and already has some template language, I hope will make it much faster and easier for you. I'll also, I've included my email on the presentation and the documents. So if you have any questions and they're not answered during today's session or even during the Q&A, please feel free to get in touch with me personally and I'll see if I can help on those. While I'm an attorney and retired attorney, I'm no longer an active attorney with an active license, so nothing here is legal advice. This is general information only. And I do have some goals for you for this workshop. The goals I have is I want your church to be successful, and I want it to have a successful online congregational meeting. Avoid those problems and pitfalls. None of us want to be embarrassed or be made a fool of because we didn't know of a major problem area. So I hope this will alleviate that. My lawyer's training tells me you always need to comply with Hawaii law and with your bylaws, and I want you to be able to use that to your advantage. So I'll tell you some about that. And then most of all, we want your members to know how to attend and participate and have it be the full type of organizational meeting that's needed for the mission of your church. And then finally, providing you templates to make it easy for you to revise as is appropriate for your particular church needs. So here's the lawyer in me speaking again. Is it, because my threshold question for anybody trying to hold an online congregational meeting is wait, you need to look at your bylaws. Is it even legal yet for you to hold an online meeting? It'd be highly unusual if any of your churches had bylaws that permitted electronic congregational meetings, although it's possible. Certainly in the past couple of years, that's been something people have thought ahead for and started doing revisions. So if you already have something that permits you to do an electronic congregational meeting, then you need to comply with your bylaws or look at them, and if they need amendments because of whatever, then amend them, and then you can be able to follow your bylaws. Now, it may be, on the other hand, that your bylaws are too specific in terms of requiring personal attendance and meeting at the church or being in person or things like that. And if they do things like that prohibit electronic meetings, then I advise to either consult with an attorney or look directly at the Hawaii law in section 414D 104.5. It's a cool law because it allows you to use an action by written ballot that can go out by email and by snail mail to your members, and you could amend your bylaws that way. Because obviously, if you can't hold an online meeting yet, you can't hold an online meeting in order to amend your bylaws to allow you to hold an online meeting. You're kind of in that catch-22. But if your bylaws are largely silent as to whether there's any in-person physical presence needed for a congregational meeting, then you can just use a different Hawaii law that's 414D-101, and that one has specific authorizing language that is so helpful. I think we are one of the few states in the entire nation that have such a helpful law for nonprofits to be able to organize electronic membership meetings, and that's what we're doing in a state. So one tip there about bylaws, they are your Bible for running a church, essentially, in terms of the organizational and corporate aspects of your church. Keep the procedural details minor there. That's not a place for procedural details so large as it is for the large umbrella issues. So use board resolutions and not bylaws for the final, for the fine details of what to do. What are the goals of an electronic congregational meeting? Right now, we're in a pandemic, so it's to stay safe and not congregate. But it could be that these things become more convenient than meeting in person for many people. And so it may be what's in our future regardless of the pandemic. And in that case, we want to make sure we can do everything that could have been done at an in-person meeting. Obviously, we can't have the same food, fellowship, and hugs, but we can have almost everything else. We have to comply with state law when we do it. We have to comply with the church bylaws. And if the church bylaws incorporate Robert's rules by reference, which most of them will, then we need to comply with Roberts. So that's what we're trying to accomplish as well. And then, because we are the church, we want to encourage the participation of as many people as possible within our church. And we want to be fair and democratic and efficient so that we can stay focused and get done the mission of the church. And we want to be the modern church. We want to be able to evolve for the new needs and new modalities from our ministry. Okay, so there is a Hawaii law regarding electronic meetings, and here's the 4 requirements that it has in regards to the members. Members must be able to read or hear the proceedings substantially concurrently. Any online service would generally do that. They need to be able to vote on matters that are submitted to your members. And that's typically things like your budget, your elections, things like that. And that becomes trickier in terms of making sure you've got details to help accomplish that. Members need to be able to pose questions, make comments, and with Roberts, of course, they need to be able to rise to make motions and points of order, things like that. And then the church needs to do something as well under the Hawaii law, and that is to make sure that we have reasonable measures that we're implementing to verify the identity of the people that are attending and voting in our meetings. And those are discussed in detail. Actually, I've lifted out the text of that law, and it's on pages 2 to 3 of the handouts. So if you're like us, if you had bylaws that are largely silent and can be used to facilitate an electronic meeting, but they don't directly authorize an electronic meeting, then you can rely on this Hawaii law that I've mentioned to be able to create a basic structure for a board resolution that allows you to adopt some basics so that you can go from there and be able to start working on your the minutiae and the details that you'll need. So some of the basics that you may want for a board resolution would be things like what electronic platform you're going to use. Is it going to be Zoom? Will it be Go Meet? Will it be something else? Do you want just voting members to be able to be present, or do you want some larger category? Generally, just having your members is pretty important because we need to restrict non-members from voting. And so there is that issue. And then a big issue for our churches that most other nonprofits don't have is, do we allow sharing of a device for households and those without Zoom? Because actually a lot of our older members and those in various reasons and situations don't have their own Zoom device, or they would run out of power after an hour or two in a congregational meeting, and they need to share a device with someone else in their household or with a friend. And so that's a big issue for you, whether to permit your voting members to attend by a shared device. And then finally, make sure in any type of board resolution that you just delegate the details to a small committee that's interested. It may be your clerk, your moderator, your IT guru, so that the whole council or board doesn't have to deal with these things. And then refine your procedures as you go along, because you'll be learning things and you'll be learning what the church's needs are and how best to incorporate them. One of the things you'll need to be creating early on is member instructions for your meeting, because this isn't just a typical meeting and people won't know how to behave and won't know how to interact. And indeed, they will not be able to get into the meeting without instructions and without guidelines for them. So your instructions for them should include things like how and when to register, how and when to check into the meeting, the types of devices that are going to be permitted. Obviously, if it's on Zoom, they have to be Zoom capable devices. Whether you're going to permit device sharing, and if so, how to share a device. And then how to speak and how to vote at the meeting, because those are going to be important things for them to participate fully. And this may not be in the same notice, but how to get a Zoom update, because if people don't update their Zoom app, you'll find that people have all sorts of different appearances to their screen and different functions, and they can't do some things, and that's because they haven't updated their Zoom. And people that don't use their computer a lot will particularly have this issue. And then finally, somebody at the church that's offering to be available to contact for details is useful to have right in your instructions, so people can call and know that no question is too basic, no question is too weird, that they're always welcome to ask. Okay, you'll need a check-in or registration procedure, because as you recall about the law that I just mentioned, you've got to, as a church, have a procedure to make sure you're only allowing your voting members to be the ones that are voting. So we allowed shared devices at our meeting. I noticed Central Union Church did as well, because there are so many families that share a device. And so the easiest place to put a certification regarding that shared device is in your registration, so that when people click to register for your meeting, that they will need to click through something that says that all votes cast from my device will accurately reflect the voting instructions from voting members that are sharing my device. Simple enough, that's all it needs. Then we also learned that it's important to send the registration email several times. A lot of members rarely check their emails. Things get lost in them, maybe hundreds of emails away. They can't find it, or even if they register the moment you give them the registration email, then they're going to lose track of the registration that they do have that came via a separate email, right? So we sent ours 3 times or 4 times, I think, once a couple weeks in advance, another one a week in advance, and then even on the morning of the meeting itself, which was right after worship, we sent it yet again, and primarily because that registration button allows you to just tap and get into the meeting if you have already registered. So it was easy for everybody to use and not need to chase down where they previously registered. Okay, and then you'll notice that some people have some weird screen names as they appear on the screen, like, well, here's somebody that says Hawaii Conference UCC. If you didn't already know Laura, you wouldn't know who that is and whether that's somebody you want in your particular meeting. Or you may have, as we do, people that call themselves Galaxy or iPhone 2 or things like that aren't at all descriptive of who they are. So if you can create in advance a list of your members who have ambiguous screen names and verify visually during your church service or whenever else you use Zoom who that person is, and start making a list of those, that can help you rename them with their full names when they come into the meeting, because often they don't know how to rename themselves. Okay, tips for voting. Voting's really important, right? The budget's going to come up, the elections are going to come up. Heaven knows what other business might come up, but there's usually other business to be conducted. So prepare and load your polls in advance, including for all expected motions that you have on your agenda, and then for the potential unexpected motion and potential motions to amend. You won't know exactly what those are going to say, but you can always have a poll that just says, this poll is for the motion to amend. And that's going to be sufficient, because the moderator can then explain what that poll is as it's launched. And the same thing for unexpected motions. You can just be able to say, this poll is to support the motion, to approve the motion type thing. And then practice launching and tallying the polls in a practice group. When you have a shared poll shared voting on a device, your polls are going to be very unusual, and I've provided 2 different examples for you on how to create such a poll. But when you do, it's more complicated to search because you're going to have a voter 1, voter 2, voter 3, voter 4, and you'll need to add the numbers for yes and no under each one of those choices. And then you may find you have people that don't know how to use the poll or can't even see the poll because they haven't updated their Zoom. And they're going to be voting in chat if you let them, and I hope you will, because chat's a nice fallback plan for people being able to do things. But nevertheless, you're going to have several numbers to need to add for that purpose. And I can't say enough about allowing chat as kind of a safety valve so that if attendees can't see a poll, if they can't vote there, allow them to vote in chat. And if you are using the shared devices and allowing that, then don't publish your poll results to attendees. Normally you want to help be transparent with attendees about what's happening. But if you publish those poll results, Zoom doesn't create them in a helpful format right now, and it's more confusing than it is helpful. So you should just have your clerk tally the votes from chat and from the polls and then announce those so that you do have what the congregation needs without confusing them. Okay, tips for raise hand. Of course, this is the best way to get permission to speak. And you have to remind people that it's the Zoom raise hand. It's not just raising the hand like this and waving around because you don't know whether somebody's trying to get their coffee or yell at their kid or whatever. So it's not the reaction icon either that has what Jack was showing, the applause or the party type things. The reason is that those reaction icons or human hand only stay up for a few seconds and they don't rise to the top of the list of participants. Whereas if you use the raise hand function on Zoom, it's going to rise to the top of the level of participants. And so it's going to be very easy for the moderator or anybody to spot who has a hand up, and they're going to stay in the order of who raised their hand first. So it's very useful in a meeting. You get to the people that raise their hand first. And then you can also use chat for your fallback for people that can't raise their hand to be able to say, hey, I'd like to speak. And then somebody can be watching chat for that purpose. So overall, chat gets to be pretty important, doesn't it? You can use chat for the check-in. We did this to identify all persons sharing a device. So in fact, I'd ask you to do it right now. If you'll go to chat and just type in your full name and then press whatever it is, send, then what it's going to do is be creating a written record for purposes of this meeting, and it's going to be able to correlate your on-screen name with your actual name. So if you failed to catch earlier some of those people that have weird screen names, you're going to have their full name that they put into chat right there beside the email name or whatever name is on their registration here. You can use the chat as a backup when somebody can't do something you're asking them to do through raise hand or poll. But you need to remind the attendees. Many people type something into chat and then they forget to hit the enter or return. And as a result, their chat never gets sent. Co-hosts can find chat very convenient because we can send notes to each other without it being seen by and not needing to interrupt the proceedings of the meeting. And one thing you'll need to do is inform your attendees not to be using chat for just chatting, but only to use it when they're requested. And that'll make it a lot easier for the moderator and co-hosts to be able to see the important things that are there. And then do keep your record afterwards of chat. It'll help you confirm attendance. So it makes it very easy for your clerk to then have the roll call of who was there. And it makes it easy to confirm voting. Tips for your Zoom account. This is for your administrator or host or whoever helps you run your Zoom account. Check your account settings and revise for the desired procedures for a large-scale meeting, and your security, that is allowing in only the people that have a registration, for example. And then enable screen sharing by the hosts and co-hosts, because you probably want to make your speakers on the budget, for example, your treasurer or your committee chairs that are going to be presenting reports, you probably want to make them a co-host so they can go from their own screens if they wish. And preload your polls and test them before the meeting to make sure that's going to be working properly. Here's one thing I nearly goofed at our meeting. Beware that when multiple people access a church account or any other account, one host that's been in there and failed to sign out properly can bar everybody else from getting into that account. And so suddenly at the time your meeting's going to start, you may find that somebody else was in your account, failed to sign out or log out properly, and everybody is blocked from being able to use that account. So make sure you develop policies and check beforehand to make sure that the account is open and that folks are signing out properly. Okay, voting via Zoom polling. Zoom has something called a poll, and we use it for voting because they haven't yet developed something that would be better, which would be called voting in elections. But for whatever reason, they are just at this poll function. So you're well advised to design those beforehand, customize them for the shared devices if you're allowing people to share devices, because then you can make sure they'll work properly. And by shared devices, again, I mean that 2 or more people, like a couple, or sometimes there's extended family living together, they're all sharing their computer screen. You want them all to be able to vote. And so you create a poll that essentially has a place for voter 1 to say yes or no on the motion. You create a separate part of that same poll that's for voter 2, and a separate part that's for voter 3, and a separate part that might be for voter 4 if you have anybody with that many. What you'll need to do, though, is help educate your members about how to use that and work through it on a test cycle to make sure you understand how it's going to work. I suggest you practice polls with the co-host first and then with members. Essentially, when you do these multiple part polls, in order to accommodate people who need to share a device, everyone needs to answer one question in every part of the poll. So if you're a sole voter and you're just a single person living alone, obviously you're only going to be voting for voter 1, but you actually need to create a space that says not applicable for voter 2, 3, and 4 for folks that are living alone, so that they can press that in order to get to the end of the poll, because the only way to get to the end of a Zoom poll is to answer all of the parts first by selecting one of the choices that's there, and then at the end press submit. And if people fail to press submit, they have not voted. You can't tally their vote in any way, so help remind them how to do that. Okay, and remember that your host and co-host cannot vote in a poll. That's just Zoom blocking it. So they must be unhosted, or they could use chat and have a private, like I used a private chat during our meeting in order to go to our clerk and say, this is the way I'm voting. And other people used chat for the same reason when they couldn't use a poll for any reason. You're going to have some members without Zoom capability, and the procedure we worked up for that is one I figured out with my mom not too long ago, and many of you may use something similar. That's people have a hard time getting into Zoom, or they don't have a device that's going to be showing Zoom in a helpful way. So a member without a Zoom capable device can share a device used by another voting member, and I just called him a friend here for this purpose. The member without a Zoom device just calls their friend, just on the normal telephone number of the friend, not the church. And the friend puts their speakerphone right next to their device, and that's going to allow hearing and speaking, so that what's going on during your meeting and what's going on with that person can be able to be shared. And there's going to be a two-way communication, provided that you're unmuted during the meeting when that person wants to speak, if they wish to. That means, of course, that the friend who's providing the speakerphone needs to vote according to the voting instructions by the member, and you as a church need to design a method to certify that members know, if they're sharing the device, that they must follow the instructions of the person who is sharing their device. And then what we did, and I highly advise, is to request advance notice during your registration process if anyone wants to use a friend. And they need to say yes, and they need to register who it is that's going to be attending by sharing their phone. And we had some people doing this even the morning of the meeting, because some folks decided at the last minute that they wanted to just get in by a friend, and that can work just fine. Everything went quickly and smoothly on that, but that allowed us to be able to make sure that anybody who wanted a friend had instructions and knew how to do that. And then confirm at the time of check-in who is sharing each device. And we did that via chat. As soon as the moderator opened the meeting and announced the opening and a quorum, we asked for, would everyone please now go to chat, put your full name into chat along with anyone else who is a voting member of the church that is attending on this device with you. And so we have this nice roll call right in our chat, and that helps us confirm who was actually there. And we can be able to cross-reference that later with our polls to make sure if somebody's voting 3 times that they had signed in for 3 voters. Okay, co-hosts. I am so thankful to the co-hosts here. They have been saving me already, figuring out how to do things and helping with things. You're going to be helped tremendously if you have a co-host situation where it's not just one person, as it really becomes too much for one person to watch and do everything. So plan on some people helping. It takes a village to run a good congregational meeting. So just assume that and outline all the tasks you need for a successful meeting and assign the duties for them. I've got some handouts there at the bottom you'll see that help show some examples of how to look at your agenda in terms of what's needed from a Zoom perspective, and then how to assign duties to different logical people within the church. And of course, you can change who does what duties, but it's just an example for that. And then make your revisions to the Zoom settings and member instructions as they're indicated by any practice sessions, because you will all be learning a lot. I'm still learning even today, all the time. So there's always more to try to make it be better. And then annotate your meeting agenda with the speakers. Obviously, your treasurer is going to be speaking to the budget. Maybe your buildings and grounds committee is going to be speaking at something. Your minister is going to be reporting. If you annotate your agenda with who's going to be speaking, whether they have a handout and whether they're going to be running the handout on their own screen, or whether the host is going to be loading up and running their handout, that's going to help tremendously the person that's actually running this. I've mentioned font size. I've seen some types of folks trying to put things on screens where the font size is less than 18, and it's a challenge here. If you look down at the tiny print on this screen, this is what a 12-point font looks like, and many treasury financial documents and correspondence often are at 10 and 11 font instead of 12. So it's just very difficult for people to see if they're on a tablet or they're on a phone. It's just not going to be legible. So the next thing after you create some basic assignments for your co-hosts is to run through it, do a practice session on everything from how to recognize the raised hands, how to lower hands of attendees, because some people don't realize they have their hand up for the entire meeting and don't really want it up. They just don't know how to get back into it to lower their hands, how to launch the poll and show what the host and the co-host and the attendees see. So in your practice session, you need people at all 3 of these levels. Some of your co-hosts may want to sign off temporarily to become just an attendee. We were shocked that our host, for example, was the one we relied on to launch our polls, which normally we would. And as he was launching them each time, he said, I cannot see what I'm launching. I can't tell. Can somebody tell me, is the poll up? For whatever reason, the co-host could see it, although we couldn't vote in it. And then the audience could see it. And then if you try to look at your results, they're going to look different for the attendees versus the co-hosts. So help kind of look at that and see how that's going to work. Then try your screen sharing. I'm still very much in the kindergarten level about screen sharing sometimes, and I get caught. And so I'm so appreciative of folks today that have helped me on that already. But make sure that whatever documents anybody wants for screen sharing are provided to the host, preferably at least a few days in advance of the meeting, so that the host has those as a backup document. If for any reason the speaker who is going to use that document can't get into their document and is all flabbergasted about what to do, the host can go ahead and load that document and get moving, and you won't have several minutes of stalling and everybody getting frustrated because the document's not coming on screen. And then one big thing that just impacts everywhere, and that is that there's problems that arise because everybody's using different devices, right? And people have different software updates because they don't understand how to update their software, and they think they're updated, but they're not really. And so you'll have people that are on smartphones, whether it's an iPhone or an Android. You'll have people on tablets, on iPads, on iMacs, on Android computers. You'll just have a whole variety of them. And sometimes the software goes back a couple years or so, where it's just looks so different. So you can't just tell people, oh, a raised hand is the little yellow hand that appears on the left side of the screen. no, it's blue in some applications. Sometimes it's on the right side of the screen. You can't tell them to, oh, just go find raised hand at the bottom of your screen. It's at the top of the screen for some people, and sometimes it's not there. It's just under 3 little dots that say more. So understanding all of that is going to be helpful at every stage here, but I'll mention it just this once because it can create some real confusion as you're trying to do training and practice sessions. You will need a practice and information session for your members. I know we were already doing this during our worship services. Sometimes the minister would have a poll for us or ask us to put information into chat or raise our hands for certain situations. So it was being done as part of worship for that purpose. But even so, people who didn't want to participate didn't need to worry about that. But in an annual meeting, people need to know that they're fully participating and that they know how to participate. And so it's going to be important to have practice sessions to make sure everybody's brought up to the level of competency for Zoom that's needed for them, at least to know how to do the basics. And the basics are get into the meeting with a Zoom link, know how to use chat. Some people may not want to use it to everyone and may just want to send it to the clerk if they're voting, for example, and want to keep that private. How to use the raise hand and the lower hand, how to vote in a poll, both for single users and anybody that wants to share a device. And then how to update Zoom and how different devices and software may look. This is not something you need to train people on, but whoever's doing the training needs to be aware of how that might look on different people's devices. And then in advance of the meeting, I'd suggest, and this is true whether you're on online or in-person meetings, have informational meetings, at least 1 or 2, before an annual meeting so that you can discuss the content of the meeting. You can talk about the budget and what the financial challenges are this year and how the money has been spent in the past year and what the proposed budget's going to look like. If you have particular reports and other things to vote on, to have that be part of an informational briefing to the congregation a week before would be great, a week before the annual meeting. So it will be fresh in people's minds. They'll have an informal place to ask questions, learn more, not need to worry about voting on anything. They can think about it for longer. And then that can really help make your congregation much better informed, more effective in participating. And then it can also alert your host and co-host team as to whether there might be proposed amendments to something like your budget or other things, so that's going to be your way to have a heads up that a motion may come and to make sure you've got a poll for that. Okay, registration process. As you're getting close to the meeting time, it's time to send out a registration button for your folks to register. And you may as well use it to include a questionnaire. And one thing would be, who are the voting members that plan to attend? Send it out multiple times. I've mentioned that before, but do ask for their full names of everyone who's going to be attending on their device. And then if you are permitting shared use of a device, make sure you include a certification that any votes cast will be accurately reflecting the voting instructions that are provided by members. Okay. The official notice of the meeting, now we've gone full circle because we're back to our bylaws. And as I mentioned, the bylaws form kind of like a Bible for the corporate and organizational aspects of a church. So you need to review those long before, at least a couple months before your annual meeting for all of the meeting requirements. They're going to deal with issues of deadlines for giving notice, the method of giving notice, who it needs to be sent to and when, election procedures, the qualifications for officers and directors. You don't want to find out at the annual meeting that you proposed a slate that includes some people that aren't even qualified to run for office or have exceeded the terms that they're permitted under your bylaws. So things like that. And then in your official notice of meeting, go ahead and include your registration link on the ones you provide by email. And it's a nice twofer. You'll get people registering at the same time that they're getting the notice of meeting. And you can embed within your notice of meeting the documents that you want. Like we had the agenda spelled out with particularity, and then as to each agenda item, anything that was handed out, we went ahead and provided that. So everybody had that 10 days in advance, and then they can use that for the informational briefing, and then they'll have that for the annual meeting itself. And do include a description of all agenda items. That's just a fair thing to do for any meeting anyway, in terms of allowing people to know what's on the agenda. But in particular, Hawaii law says that if you fail to put a matter on the notice and agenda, on the noticed agenda, then unless you have 1/3 or more of your voting members present at the meeting, you cannot put a new agenda item on there. And it could be that your quorum is much less than 1/3 of your voting members. So just remember that. And then make sure on your registration materials that you do have somebody that can be the contact person. Okay, Robert's rules. Why use these? You know, I'm a fan of Robert's rules, and I understand that some folks are intimidated by them, or that they seem like they're being misused sometimes because it prevents certain types of discussion. But there's two things about Robert's rules. Number one, they're designed to ensure that a meeting's fair and open, efficient, and orderly. They're designed to make sure that all viewpoints are heard and that the majority doesn't abuse the rights of the minority, and that there is an orderly process where everybody can know what the issue is that we're talking about, and that it can be resolved in a fair manner, regardless of whether you've got unanimity or completely divided opinion. So it's just a fairness, it's a fairness and transparency thing to begin with. But second of all, it may be required by your church bylaws. So if you read through and see that your church bylaws incorporate Roberts, which is certainly a reasonable thing, and most corporate bylaws do, then you need to comply with Roberts. But one of the things that Roberts rules permits is to have special rules to fit your own needs. They just need to be adopted properly. So there is that. Okay, and now for the fun. One thing to think of is, gee, do you want to have an intermission? Do you want to have some photos and a little video stream that maybe your youth of the church can create to make it a little bit more fun and get people in the mood before the meeting? Do you want to have some special celebration and thanks for your past and future officers? By all means, you want to be kind and patient and loving during the meeting itself, and just leave a feeling that the church is truly on the mission of God that we are here for, and that people can feel like it's a meeting that is consistent with the mission of the church. So those are all of my comments from the presentation, and I'm open now for questions.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to just say thank you to Ellen, and I'm from Central Union Church. I am the chair of the council at Central Union, and she said we did just have our budget meeting, and it was great to have the help of Crossroads and to be able to have that collaboration on the things that they had put in place. So I just want to say thank you to Ellen on that. And the other thing I just wanted to emphasize is practice this stuff ahead of time. We did several run-throughs, and prepare your congregation that it's going to take much longer than an in-person meeting. Everything takes longer. The registration, just getting into the meeting, takes longer as you know, folks get checked in. The question and answers, all that stuff, it's just going to take a long time. And so you just have to emphasize over and over, folks, thank you for your patience. We understand. We do want to give everyone who wants to speak a chance to speak. We ran, I think, 3 sample polls before we finally did the vote. Again, you've got to give folks a chance to get comfortable with it and to ask their questions. Why I'm hitting submit, nothing's happening. Well, it's because you haven't hit not applicable in your other questions. But yeah, just lots and lots of practice. And then just the other last tip is we did have someone have a helpline that we said, if you have questions, you can call this number. And we had someone standing by to answer the phone and actually talk folks through. Because even though we had the instructions step by step by step, and even though we went over those and over those and over those throughout the meeting, it's just helpful and reassuring for a lot of folks to have a live person to talk to. So just, I wanted to share those things with you all. And
that is wonderful. Thank you. I'm learning from you. I appreciate it so much. And your materials are so helpful. They're part of the handout here. I thought they were just really well thought out. Thank you. And I will have one practice poll that we'll use during the last part of this session, just so you can see what it looks like to have a shared poll. But let's answer some of the questions first.
I've known, well, I see that Laurie's been able to put the polls on, but so how do you recommend how that we learn how to do that. So do we go on YouTube and follow instructions from them, or does Zoom have it, or? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's such a useful question. If you just Google how to do something on Zoom, how to run a poll on Zoom would be your question. Generally, Zoom will come up as the first response on a Google search. And they have some excellent materials there. And they have some that are videos, they have some that are printed text, and then YouTube will have some too. So yes, I think that's been the easiest for me, is just to Google every single thing that I have a question about. And people have some terrific advice, either from Zoom directly or on blogs.
The other question is, when you have, if you have a question, well, when you raise your hand, as a host, do you see who, I guess it indicates who asks a question first, or who you ask?
It does. Let's see. Right now, all the hands are down, but there were hands up. And what happens is that when we have a participant list on, and I believe you'd be able to see the same thing, that on participants, that the person with a raised hand rises to the top, and there's a yellow raised hand beside their name on the list of participants. And they will stay in that priority list with people who later raise a hand behind them, so that we can take them in order from top down. It makes it really easy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You have a comment from Jane Ryan Kariwa. Jane, you want to speak it yourself?
Not necessarily. I was just saying that as we planned for electronic meetings, we found a lot of assistance at the website for the National Association of Parliamentarians, including webinars, but also printed resources.
I just wanted to be clear. Most of what you had been saying was about polling, all of which requires that somebody have access to a screen Zoom device. But
Right.
Zoom also allows telephone connections. When you went through and described the procedure for people to vote via a friend, that kind of made it clear to me that if you're running a church meeting or an official church meeting, you need to cut off the telephone contact. Is that right?
No, the opposite, that the contact comes on. Say I'm serving as a friend for somebody that really can't run Zoom and doesn't have a device or doesn't feel confident about it. They call me on my cell phone. I put them on a speaker on my cell phone and put it right next to my computer here. And they are on the meeting the entire time by listening through my telephone into their telephone. And if they ever want to speak, they're going to be speaking to me, and I would need to ask to unmute in order to have them speak to the group, because otherwise I'd be muted. Does that answer? No.
Zoom has a facility where you call in on a telephone rather than using a screen device.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And yes, you can call in technically to Zoom, and I'm not sure what those people would be seeing when they call in. If they cannot see a poll, then they don't know what the poll is, right?
You know, we held our congregational meeting last fall before we knew all the stuff that was discussed here. I just wondered, we took our attendance and our voting orally, you know, with a couple of us checking the official membership list and verifying. I know that's time consuming. I'm not sure about the feature of the voting poll, so I have to go back to our group and introduce that. But is it valid still to do it orally? I mean, we checked in fact, we did it twice.
That can work. I mean, a poll, the one thing might be that your bylaws may have something that says that something's to be done by secret ballot, and a voice vote isn't appropriate unless you have unanimous consent.
We approved the budget. Even in our regular in-person meetings, we always did it openly, you know.
Right. The voice vote's fine.
Some like the selection of a pastor or something that would do, by secret vote. But so it's acceptable.
Yes, it takes longer, but that's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to address what Eric was just asking about the Zoom phone in, because we did have an option for that if people were to call in rather than do the screen. What our procedures set up were to be was that we would have to then go call on each person who was only available by phone orally for them to cast their vote. As it turned out, everyone that came on through a device. We did not have any phone-ins that day, so we didn't have to do that. But that was going to be, we did have the procedures in place that if folks had done the phone-in Zoom, that we would have to go to them individually that way.
Okay, and here's a question from Jane about, can we comment on voting by raised actual hands, not virtual hands? Yeah, you could use actual hands for that. You can use the voice vote, which we did talk about earlier. You could use the raise hand for voting and just go through and count the raised hands, if you're sure that everybody can raise their hand. And frankly, there's a lot of diversity in regards to competency levels on Zoom. And so I think it's safer to provide the chat as a backup on that. Or you could ask people to put both hands in front. You can do those things. It becomes much, a little bit more iffy for the moderator to try to figure out, is that person voting or are they just rubbing their nose or whatever. Any other questions or comments for your church group? I certainly echo Martha's comments. We found that practice was extremely helpful and made much of all of us a lot more informed on how to use Zoom effectively. And now we can spread that out to our mission teams and to our different meetings so that it's become a net plus for the church in terms of our functionality. And that's a really positive thing. And I think we found that our membership attending was just as high or slightly higher than had been at congregational meetings in person. So that was really nice, because so many people are isolating right now that we would have had problems with a quorum if we had tried to do it in person.
So if there are no further questions, I usually don't presume to speak for everyone, but I'm going to presume and say, thank you very much, Ellen. If you want to affirm that, you can hit one of the reaction buttons any way you want. And so light up your screen, or you can wave or whatever. There we go. We're getting all kinds of hands and things up in the air. So
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Can I ask it before you?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm the secretary of our council and I take minutes for everything. Are there special guidelines in terms of how to take minutes at a virtual meeting? Besides the obvious, you got to record votes and people.
It's pretty much, yeah, that's a good question. Are there any special guidelines for the secretary or clerk who's taking the minutes? The minutes are roughly the same regardless of whether you're on an online platform or they're in person. It should be, you would always state where the meeting's being held. And so it would be appropriate to state that it's being held online via Zoom. And that it was properly
recorded, because we record our meetings also.
Yes. We printed out our chat room afterwards, which was a great benefit to determining exactly who was present and then being able to cross-reference against the polls to make sure we had fair voting going on. So that assisted our clerk somewhat in developing the list of attendees to have that available.
If there's anything special that might be
not particularly special. No, thank you for the question, though. If folks later have any questions that you think of that you're not thinking of now, you're welcome to get in touch.
Thank you. Thank you again, Ellen.